Hi, I'm talking to Leanne Kaye. Leanne is a British-trained midwife and CEO and co-founder of Pregnant in the City. Hi, Leanne, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Leanne, today we're going to talk a little bit about breastfeeding, some frequently asked questions when it comes to breastfeeding. Let's start off by discussing formula versus breastfeeding. Why, in your opinion, is breastfeeding best?
Well, breastfeeding is best, mainly because we haven't yet come up with the entire product. I think what the formula companies have attempted to do is good and is going in the right direction, and I'm very careful not to overly talk about the negatives of formula, because there are women and there are circumstances where formula is a necessity and is a great help to women that, babies that would otherwise be suffering. And the breast milk itself, why is it better? We don't fully understand the nature of breast milk. It has a lot of properties that protect the baby and are very individual for that mother and that baby. And therefore the complexity is very difficult to mirror in science. And the advantages were spoken about so often now that it's almost like this banter that I hear drumming in my head, prevent obesity, prevent diabetes, prevent heart disease. Yet at the same time, I want to say to mothers, okay, but you're not necessarily going to give your baby obesity, diabetes, those problems if you're not able to breastfeed.
So there's definitely no issue, breastfeeding is best, but if there's some sort of issue where the mother cannot breastfeed and she has to give formula, there's definitely no problem with that.
Yeah, I come across I'm very careful with the women that meet me. I've sometimes met other breastfeeding specialists before me, and they've already been made to feel guilty and a bit sort of defeated and sad about the situation. And I sort of enter the scene and say, okay, first of all, let's see if we can fix and get you back on the breastfeeding road and, get this situation working. And if not, then, we do have formula to hand. But I tend to really try and see whether a woman wants to breastfeed. Like today, there's so much society pressure saying breast is best and let's all breastfeed. But some women, for whatever reasons, their own personal reasons, it can be that they've got past history of problems in their own lives that nobody's asked them those questions, because we're all barging in saying how amazing it is to give breast milk. And I just feel that dealing with women on a much more holistic level and really listening to them and looking at the family dynamic. I mean, often I'm called in to do a consultation when the breastfeeding itself is actually okay, but what's happening is they don't feel comfortable doing it in front of others. They don't feel comfortable going out to a coffee shop. They're not leaving the home. They're getting more and more stressed about that. They've got their, in-laws and their partner all kind of saying, yeah, this is great, you should be doing this, and it's all compounding, and the breastfeeding is working on some levels, but for her it's not, it's not working. It's trying to work through those problems, and I find that when I enter, often that we get a dialogue going, and I really, I want to get to know the woman. I want to know what's going on with her.
Absolutely. Coming back for a moment to the breastfeeding, how often should you breastfeed, and what are the intervals from the time the baby starts breastfeeding to when the baby stops?
Okay, so $1 million question there. How often? How often and how long? To simplify it, it's as often as the baby wants. What does that mean? So the baby's crying, I'm going to feed the baby. A newborn baby will want to be at the breast nearly 100% of the time. So from the start, you do measure the feed from the start of the feed to the start of the next feed. So for example, we're sitting here, 10 o'clock in the morning, and you're going to start feeding. The feed can take up to an hour, realistically, between maybe changing, readjusting your position, the baby's position. You can be sitting there for up to an hour, and that's okay. That's within the realms of normality, and you're feeding your baby. Then the baby might settle for about an hour. and then you can be feeding again. So you imagine the gap in between feeds can be as short as 1 hour in those early days. Ideally, you want to get things into a rhythm. I often say 2 to 3 hourly is perfectly acceptable. With my first son, he really did that. He didn't go longer than 2 to 3 hourly. 2.5 hours was his max, way up until he was 3-4 months old. And people are often astounded that's a lot. And it takes a lot of time out of your day. You know, it takes and a lot of, you can say patience, but I often say to women, okay, you have to make a decision. This is what you've chosen to do. You want to breastfeed your baby. Here's the reality check. Your baby isn't necessarily going to go on the boob, feed for 20 minutes, finish, and go to sleep, and not need your, not need your breast from that moment.
What about waking a baby up to feed a baby? Say your baby was prem and you need to feed it more often. Do you believe that you should wake the baby up to feed?
I do. I think there's certain circumstances, and often women will be told very strict guidelines in the hospital of how long the baby can go without having a breastfeed or a formula feed. And that's calculated strictly on the baby's weight, age, and what's been going on so far in the hospital. So when you're discharged, you're given millions of pieces of paper. One of them will be, please don't let your baby go longer than X, and please wake your baby if your baby slept longer. For example, even in a full-term baby, 4 kilos, 3.5, 4 kilo term healthy baby, I would still suggest that baby doesn't go longer than 5 hours. And there's two reasons, this is in the first month I'm talking about. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is the baby will need to feed and may be overheated. That's often a really big reason for babies not waking to eat, is that they're overly heated. They're okay. They're not in very serious danger, but they're too wrapped up, so they're not rousing for food. And that's another thing that when I walk into a home, I'm very quick to recognize what's going on with the way the baby's been put to bed and layers of clothing. And the other thing is for the mother, to protect the mother. You do not want to go within those first 2 to 3 weeks longer than 5 hours without breastfeeding, in terms of your breasts getting too full and a little engorged.
And what about nursing for comfort? Okay or not okay?
That's a great question, and one that I love. I think it's totally okay, and I'm putting my stamp out there. I'm not somebody that says, have your baby hanging off your boob while you walk around the street. I'm not against mot-sets, dummy, pacifier, whatever word you want to use. I'm not against all these other things, giving the baby to someone else. I'm very down the middle of the road with this. I like the idea of something, they call it attachment parenting, where you do spend a lot of the time close to your baby. But I think there's a middle ground with it, as with a lot of parenting issues. And I think a baby will feed for comfort. They will also want to be held for comfort. I'm a big believer in something called the 4th trimester. And I tell all my new mummies when I'm doing my childbirth preparation that the baby's born, no longer inside you, but there's something called the 4th trimester. And that's when the baby is getting used to being on the outside. And they still need a lot of those comforts from the inside. That is being held, being rocked. And the sucking is their only way, one of their only ways of getting enjoyment, of getting satisfaction. So yes, of course, they will suck for comfort. And there has to be, again, a balance. If I go to a woman and she says, he's on me all the time, then I would check, have you tried anything else before putting the baby on the breast? It's a fine balance, and I see both sides of the spectrum. I meet women all the time that are pulling their hair out because the baby literally has not left her alone over a 24-hour period. And then on the flip side, women that are just when's the feed finished? Because he's still feeding after 10 minutes. And it's getting a realistic balance of what to expect from breastfeeding. And I do recommend that women have a preparation, have a lesson before they breastfeed. Even if they've breastfed before, if it's been a few years, always good to catch up on the realities of what breastfeeding can be.
So what organizations or what people can mothers get in contact with if they're looking to get more information on breastfeeding, or if they're battling?
Sure. Well, talking here in Israel, there are a lot of breastfeeding consultations. They call themselves lactation consultants, breastfeeding counselors, breastfeeding therapists, and La Leshli Gabig over here. And I think, for one, I provide breastfeeding consultations. I provide them over Skype, which you can visit the Pregnant in the City website and book. And I also provide visits, consultations, hourly consultations, where I'll come to your home. And I do really honour this. If somebody phones and they're in need, I tend to say that I will get to you within 24 to 48 hours. Otherwise, there's no point. There's no point chatting to me and me saying, okay, I'm going to see you next Tuesday. If I can't and I'm too busy, I do have friends and colleagues that may be able to help. But I do think getting help early is essential in any breastfeeding dilemma. Even if you feel like it's only a small problem, I'm in a bit of pain, maybe if I just do this, maybe if I just do that. If that's the case, you can have a Skype consultation. It has been successful for me. Often if I do one visit, it also, economically, if I've seen, this is going to sound quite funny, but if I've seen the baby and the boob, and I've seen the two together, once I've had that initial visit, the next time I go, or if somebody wants to ask me questions over the phone or over Skype, it's very manageable to do it that way.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.